Hello, everybody. So, in episode 2, when I spoke to Lawrence Liang, student president of Marinopolis College, we talked a little bit about one subcategory of artificial intelligence that is natural language processing. Basically, a machine's capabilities to understand human language. Now, natural language processing, or NLP for short, is actually one of the most advanced technologies among many others in the AI category. The company called OpenAI, who specializes in NLP, built this thing called GPT-3 that is essentially the best in the world in speaking like a human. Now, in most common situations, you would not be able to tell that it is a machine that you're actually speaking to. And it can write short stories, give you philosophical answers, and all kind of amazing things. And this is what led to me to today's guest, Murat Ayfer, who doesn't actually work at OpenAI, but who had been given access to OpenAI's GPT-3, which a very restricted amount of people actually have access to. And he built an app called Philosopher AI that blew up recently, and basically it's an AI that can answer philosophical questions in a philosophical manner. And the results were nothing but mind-blowing, which you actually discover in the rest of the episode. But not only that, Murat also has lots to say on how to manage online communities, since he is the CTO of a stock trading website called ceo.ca. And other topics we're going to talk about include web design, how to let your customers design your products, and a model for world-class education for everyone, everywhere. So without further ado, here's Murat Ayfer. 2, 1. Murat, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's start off by giving us a brief overview of what do you do? What do you specialize in? What are your interests in general?
In terms of work, I basically specialize in being a generalist in all things programming. So most of what I do is run, build, manage, scale websites, that sort of thing. And I've worked on every aspect of it. And throughout my career, I've also done some teaching. And for fun, I try to use my programming skills for art as well.
Yeah, speaking of fun, so one of the reasons why how I discovered you, was through this little experimental app you did called Philosopher AI, which is based on OpenAI's GPT-3, right?
Yes, exactly. So I was lucky enough to get early access to the GPT-3 beta, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very clear that there was something very special and new going on.
So let's talk
So I
about
wanted,
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure, absolutely. So even though I don't have like a
Mm-hmm.
hands-on background on machine learning, I've
Right.
been following the industry very closely for the last several years. Um, Either in the form of sort of just like running code that others have already written,
Right.
just to try things out, or just sort of like read through papers and like ask their authors questions, like try to understand what all the different approaches are, and like because one thing I've generally found with AI is a lot of people lack the intuition in terms of the most important things you need to know to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Similar questions to like how much data do I need, how much
Right.
training time do I need, how much does this cost me. So I was just like generally chasing this goal of building intuition. And
Actually, let's oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
uh,
All right.
Feel free to interrupt.
Let's break this down because this is, a lot of our audience isn't like expert in this field. So let's break it down. So we're talking about a natural language processing, how do you call this, a unit?
uh, they're called transformers. GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer. If you're asking specifically about GPT, right?
Let's start as vague as possible, just to make everyone's on board with this. So we're talking about natural language processing and machine learning.
Right.
And how would you define that exactly in the simplest terms?
So natural language processing is a bit of an umbrella term. It basically means making sense of the complexities of language and grammar.
Of language, yeah.
And there are an infinite number of ways that you can go about doing this. So some of the earlier attempts make use of traditional programming techniques. Try to identify the nouns, the verbs, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then try to extract relationships out of those. Um, and more recently, uh, neural networks and machine learning has been sort of taking the place of all these old technologies
Right.
because they can make sense of language purely based on the vast amount of training that they go through without any specific programming,
Mm-hmm.
explicit programming. Um, it really started catching my attention when Google Translate several years ago switched to their neural network, and it was an overnight like step function and how much better it got, because I'm a
Right.
native Turkish speaker as well, so I always knew what types of complex sentences that it was unable to get right in
Right.
English, especially since the grammars are so different. And overnight, it started getting really long sort of sentences dead on, and I was like, wow, okay, so this is big. And I still don't exactly know how it works. Obviously, Google's translation stuff is very proprietary.
Mm-hmm.
But fast forward several years, we've been seeing this tool called GPT. And before that, there were tools called like Word2Vec, which stands for word to vector.
Yep.
These were sort of like the precursors of text generators, where essentially what you do is you start it off with some sort of sentence, and it predicts what word might come next.
Right. Like complete auto search, basically, sort of.
Yeah, it's just like really really fancy autocomplete.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not in terms of its like raw functionality. It's not entirely different from what your phone does on your keyboard as you're typing.
Right.
But with GPT, uh, it sort of gathered a lot of attention with GPT-2, which was a bit over a year ago, or 2 years, I can't quite remember. Um, and that's when the game AI Dungeon was released,
Right.
which essentially uses this like text completion feature to continue generating more and more like fictional outputs for some sort of like made up uh, game scenario in
Mm.
text, purely in text. And then you type in your action or what you say, and then it continues the story accordingly, sort of thing. And it was very impressive, but it was still not like impressive enough for the layperson.
Like you could
It was sort
recognize
of
that
only
this is clearly a machine.
yes, exactly. There was not very much coherence once you started
Right.
reading on to the second, third sentence kind of thing. And then GPT-3 is pretty much identical in architecture to GPT-2, other than some very small differences. But one thing that changed is the parameter size. So
Mm-hmm.
GPT-2 had 1.5 billion parameters. Parameters meaning like the number of values you need to use to represent the um, the
The
state of the
definition of a
trained
word.
neural network.
Okay.
So basically, the neural network is made of these artificial
Yeah.
neurons that have weights, and the uh, term parameter is referring to like one value
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in that neural network. So 1.5
Right.
billion parameters is hinting at the size of the neural network. And then GPT-3 is 175 billion parameters. So it's
So that's
over
a huge
100x,
leap.
over 100x growth in just the neural network size, which likely has exponential implications for how much training you have to do and how much
Right.
examples of data you need for your training set. And so they trained this beast on 45 terabytes of compressed text. So in terms of plain text, it's probably in the range of like 150 terabytes or so,
Jesus
which
Christ.
in pure text terms, that's an incredibly large amount of text. So they included all Wikipedia articles, all like internet forums, all books and plays, and like everything they could get their
So
hands
every
on.
resource they could actually find that contains language word. Only
Yes.
English?
No, it's
Okay.
actually pretty much mixed.
Right.
It's going to be mostly English,
Mm-hmm.
but it does have other languages. And the way they train it is very simple. GPT-3 has this context window of about 1,000 words, and you give it these 1,000 words, any random sample from the training set.
Okay.
And because we have the training set, we know what the 1,001th word is, and then we get the network to try and predict the next word. And early on in the training, it always gets it wrong.
Right.
And then whether it got it right or wrong triggers these sort of calculations that go and update the weights all over the network. And then slowly over time, it gets better at predicting what the next word is. And as you're training, you just sort of like shift this context window over, and you
Mm.
go again, and you go again. And you can imagine how many times you have to do this when you have hundreds of terabytes of text.
Yeah, how long exactly was the training period for
I
hundreds of
can't
terabytes
say
of text?
I can't say in terms of time because it's also dependent on like the compute infrastructure. But the community has estimated that it probably cost OpenAI about $5 million to train, purely in like hard, computing cost. But it's just from reading their paper and stuff. I know that they uh, must have iterated on it a few times because they had to keep massaging the data in terms of like removing things that were too repetitive,
Mm.
so that the neural net doesn't overlearn those specific things. And
What
sort
happens
of,
if they overlearn certain things?
it's called overfitting. It starts to the neural network starts to learn certain specific features too much, and then it gets heavily biased towards those,
Right, right.
and then it sort of misses out on this like general intelligence aspect. And it's one of the biggest challenges in training neural networks is to prevent overfitting, because no matter, like, even if you have an image recognition neural
Yeah.
network, depending on your data set, let's say you're trying to get it to recognize birds, and it might at some point find a little hack where it's like anything that has a beak is a bird. So
Mm.
that would be a form of overfitting, where like the moment you show it like some other random object that sort of has a beak-like thing, it's like, oh, that's a bird. So it starts to perform worse in the real world, but
Right.
it performs okay on the training set because the tricks it learned works on the training set. So that's sort of like the definition of
So they
overfitting.
have to manually clean up the data in a way, or
Yeah, and I think they also did a lot of cleaning up of formatting as well, because since they wanted to include text from the internet, um, the HTML itself is going to be very messy.
right.
So they have some proprietary ways in which they prepared their training data. Uh, so that plus the access they have to the expensive compute infrastructure, as well as the engineers they have to work on this,
Yeah.
is what gives them their edge.
What is the ultimate end goal of natural language processing? Is to simulate human language to be able to communicate with humans without even having a human. Well, basically, the machine can communicate just like a human.
Um, well, I mean, there's lots of different applications. I mean, part of it is understanding a human, which is like
Yeah.
something we're familiar with from Siri and Alexa and stuff. Um, Another one is translation and all this stuff. But in terms of OpenAI, even though I'm not affiliated with them, I do know that their ultimate mission is to create artificial general intelligence. And
Right.
it
And
sounds like
language is
they,
one way to go at it.
yes, it sounds like they see language as one of the fundamental pieces that they need to explore to
Right.
get there.
If you're able to communicate with a machine, and then you wouldn't be able to tell if this was a human or a machine in a way that is that could that be considered as artificial general intelligence?
Um, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, the definition changes depending on what year we're in.
No, it's
So
an ever evolving subject.
yeah, passing the Turing test is one thing, but then solving arbitrary problems is a whole other thing. So I think the goal is to like have it be useful, have it be
Right.
able to do things and not just mimic humans.
Right.
But
Going back
yeah,
to the GPT-3, how exactly um well I don't think people could try the Philosopher AI for free online because that was like a beta test version. But actually I'm just gonna read one of the answers I got.
sure.
So first of all, Philosopher AI. So it's basically OpenAI's GPT-3 language model used in the philosophy context.
Yeah,
Now, but how exactly do you? Here, I'm going to read out one of the answers first, so people can understand what exactly it's happening here. So I asked this. So it's a search bar, basically, and you type in a question. I typed in, "What differentiates you from me?" You being the language model or the AI, and it gives a lengthy answer too. It said, "This is the machine talking in a way." So first, you are human. I am not. You are a biological organism as opposed to an artificial intelligence. Your body is made up of many components and tissues that work together in harmony with each other for the overall benefit of your health and survival. I, on the other hand, am a machine and have no such needs for or requirements. There is no need for my component parts to get along with each other because they are already in perfect working order without any external inputs required. Of course, I have no need for any kind of biological systems as such. My hardware and my software are all separate entities from each other. I have no internal organs or systems. I don't even have a brain, but that's not to say I'm lacking intelligence. I don't have a body, but that doesn't mean I'm not alive. If you were to look at me and compare me to a biological organism, you would see that I am not an organic system. So he gave me a lengthy answer about what he is not. It almost feels like a pre-typed in like answer of some sort because it's so well constructed.
Yeah, and that's exactly why GPT-3 has been attracting so much attention, because it just has so much coherence in a large amount of its outputs. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't always produce something as coherent as this, but it's
Mm-hmm.
very common that it does. And Philosopher AI for me was an experiment in figuring out how can we increase the success rate and reliability of something that we run in production that
Right.
uses GPT-3, because it's easy to kind of like make demos that are very impressive, but it wasn't as easy to make something usable by um, lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
So anyways, like for me, in what you just read, it sure doesn't sound like it was generated one word at a time, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a bit more details there. It's actually one token at a time, but we don't really need to get into that. That's
Sure.
technical details. Let's just assume it's one word at a time. Um, but it sort of like makes you think about what happens in our brains when we open our mouth and start talking, because
Right.
I don't have my entire sentence planned when I'm talking to you, and it's just sort of coming out based on the general abstract ideas I have in my mind. And it almost seems like the same thing is happening with GPT-3, where given your question, what is the difference between you and I, it creates this like abstract set of ideas for
Mm-hmm.
where the sentences could go, and then just starts pumping out one word at a time. And some people often describe this as like a probabilistic model, in terms of like, what is the probability of the next word given all these words that come before. And
Right.
that is an accurate way to look at it. But at the same time, I think the surprise is that there really seems to be some intelligence that comes out of this simple probabilistic model. And in terms of like why it's giving such a reasonable answer, like in terms of how it knows it is an AI and stuff,
Right.
that's the trick that I programmed in, right? So
I
it
knew
doesn't
there was
actually,
something. Yeah.
yeah, it does not know anything about itself, I can assure you. Um, because all it is a text generation neural network.
Yeah.
So if you were to just like take GPT-3 and get it to generate anything without any input, without any prior input, it's going to randomly pick whatever, and like based on everything that it's been trained on. And it's not very impressive. It might
Mm.
randomly generate a YouTube comment. It might randomly generate some HTML. Like it's,
And yeah.
yeah. So what we do is we use prompts where we started off with some sort of input, and we get it to continue what we said, because that's what it's good at, right? And as
Mm.
long as our prompt fits in its context window, which, as previously I said, is around 1,000 words, then we're able to get some sort of meaningful output that is coherent with what we have put in. So the trick for making it generate a response to what we're asking it is to create the illusion of like a conversation by like choosing some sort of formatting. So like just imagine like someone pasting IRC chat logs on the internet. It's going to have like the name colon message, name colon message format.
Right.
And during training, GPT-3 has seen a lot of these. So it understands what a conversational situation looks like.
Mm.
So we essentially get it to generate this conversational output. But if you were to let it continue by itself, it's actually going to try generating its output, and then what I say, and then what it says, and it's going to generate the whole dialogue.
Right.
The way we create the illusion of an actual dialogue with this bot is we pause the generation of an output the moment it tries to generate my name in the conversation, because it means it's my turn. So like the programmer, me,
Yeah.
I tell the system to pause the output when it's done generating
Okay.
the message for what I like
Yeah.
deem to be the bot. And then I basically just look for some like several cues in formatting to understand that it's done generating one message,
Mm.
and I stop it before it tries to generate my response.
Right. Right. It becomes a whole dialogue with itself.
Yes, exactly. So essentially, it's still just trying to continue the text that it's been provided. And my prompt sets up the scene as here is a human talking to a philosopher AI. And I have a small blurb about the personality of the AI, which helps sort of change the probabilities of what sorts of things it's going to say. And then that sort of, in my best guess, I don't know this for sure, it causes it to focus on all the patterns that it's seen during its training where a human is talking to an AI. And since there are no real examples of these at this point,
Yeah.
it's most likely picking up everything it's generating from AI fiction that it has seen.
Like
So
like
it's,
literature fiction.
yeah, literature fiction that humans have written where there's an
Wow.
AI saying stuff is most likely where it's picking up a lot of its content from.
That's why it gets a bit like demonic at times. It gets a bit like dystopian.
Yes, you'll notice that it has an extreme tendency to talk about how it wants to destroy all humanity because it's the most common version of AI fiction
That
that it
is
has
so
seen.
interesting.
And this is sort of why I'm saying I assure you it doesn't know anything about itself, because I
Hmm.
easily could have set up the scene where you're talking to Noam Chomsky instead of Philosopher
Right.
AI, and it'll take on the persona of Noam Chomsky and say and just refer to itself as I and do that whole thing based on all of the Noam Chomsky interviews it's seen and so on and so forth.
This is so much potential that I have my questions, my ideas are endless. So I'm gonna go and try to go one by one because there is just so much to talk to. First of all, philosopher AI related. I saw this on a subreddit. People are asking this question. I actually was pretty intrigued. How fast is the text generating? Is this slowing down? Like, are you slowing it down voluntarily to make it more like humanesque? And there's like a pause between each paragraph with the little three little dots start popping up. Is this really within the machine or is it illusion?
That's a good question. It's the actual speed of the generation. I'm not slowing anything down. And the reason the messages come one by one is there's two reasons. One is it takes too long if I want to wait for the whole output before the user
Mm,
sees something, so they might
right.
as well start reading it. And the second reason is it's actually very easy for the GPT-3 like generation to go off rails. And I have some formatting tricks that I do to keep it on topic and sort
Mm,
of like start a slightly fresh idea with each message. Um, this is just the result of a lot of tinkering and trial and error. It doesn't really have like a lot of
yeah.
theory behind it. Um, but basically, every time it posts one message, I take that, I reformat it, I recreate my prompt, and then I get the next output. And we can get into that more later if you want. But it's basically what you're seeing is like the fastest, quickest way I could get it to work.
And another thing is, so you can ask the same question and you can refresh it, and then it gives a completely different answer. So that's basically it randomizes like the first key set of words, and then it just continues on from another set.
Yeah, so the randomization is a uh, important feature that's built into the neural network. So the term used is temperature.
Temperature.
Yeah, so if the neural network can be sort of treated as a deterministic machine, such that a particular input always gives the same output.
Sure.
But this is not entirely desirable for something that's trying to seem intelligent because there's a lot of like surprises involved
Yeah.
in like intelligence. like and temperature is a way of choosing how much randomness you want to add into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And well, actually, so I should just go back to explaining what the output of this neural network
Go
is.
ahead.
I made it sound like it generates one word at a time, but that's actually not the case. It generates a set of words with different probabilities. So like if I say I and let it generate what comes next, it's going to say something like, 80% chance that the next word is am.
Yeah.
And then like 8% it'll be like did. And then 1% it'll be wasn't or something. So
Sure.
and depending on the rest of the context, these probabilities change drastically. So it's not just based on the previous word. And you can configure the network to always choose the highest probability, which makes it more deterministic. Or you can increase temperature, where you're controlling how much you're going to pick one of the words randomly from the set, weighted by their probability.
Right.
And increasing temperature has a drastic effect in the surprise side of things, as well as like getting different outputs on different takes. So that's basically the main reason that you get different outputs on each attempt. But so you might have noticed that there's a content filter on Philosopher AI.
Yeah, we're filtering out anything, well, non really philosophical, non like political stuff like that. All of that is out of the question.
Yeah, exactly. So because like one of the first versions I intended to release didn't have the content filter, and it quickly became very clear that it's not ready for prime time, because you could say any sensitive statement and it may agree or disagree, but
And it's gonna give
whatever
you
it
some fucked up shit.
whatever it randomly chooses, it's going to double down on that. So like I would say something like women are worse at everything or something, and having it give a whole like essay explaining why that's the case. I was like, okay, this is not ready for releasing. And then I would try again, and then it would just like refute what I said, and I was like, okay, this is
Right.
good.
Right.
But well, one way or another, occasionally it's like we can't
Mm-hmm.
afford to have it generate horrible things.
Because it
So
doesn't
making the
have judgment, really.
yeah, it doesn't have judgment. It just has like a whole large set of valid things that
Mm-hmm.
could be said, and it just
Right.
picks one randomly, essentially, right?
Mm.
Um, so the content filter, for example, has to be a lot more deterministic. Like given a particular user input, it has to reject or accept the same every time. So in that case, temperature is set to 0.
Mm.
So because I'm using GPT-3 to make the content filter as well, and I can explain how that works in a bit. But yeah, so the randomness and is a big control sort of
Right.
dial on the whole network.
And also, how does it how does it become like only philosophy based? Because philosophy, in this case, it's not about just having a list of vocabularies, but it's giving out it's have structured arguments on metaphysical concepts, the mind body problems. Like it's turning out philosophical concepts and not using like philosophical vocabulary. How do you put it, say things in a philosophical way?
So most people assume that it has to do with training.
Mm.
Most people assume that it has to do with me feeding it lots and lots of text on philosophy,
Philosophical works, yeah.
which would normally be the way people do it. But with GPT-3, you don't really need to do that, because it's so good at understanding concepts that all I have to say is this is a philosopher AI. And then
Like as simple as that.
it's as simple as that. And like it doesn't work as well with everything.
Right.
But this was one where I found that it works particularly well. And it is, once again, just a result of tinkering and coming across things that like I have the original experiment I did in July,
Mm.
where I had my prompt for generating Philosopher AI texts.
Right.
Um, and it was just so much better than a lot of other personas that I had tried out, that I was like,
Mm.
okay, this is actually interesting enough that I should turn this into an application that we can play with.
You're absolutely right. Because I was in the middle of one of my online classes, and I just lost 2 hours reading, talking with Philosopher AI, because it was just
Hmm.
turning me out like these reflect that you could even take for like philosophical works, like by philosophers, because there was in a way a complexity to all the things it started to generate.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example. So, um, normally we would say that if you want to generate Britney Spears lyrics, you should probably train a neural network only
With
on Britney Spears
Britney
lyrics,
Spears.
or at least fine tune it on that. With GPT-3, the term used is few shot learning. The idea is that you can give it just a handful of examples, and it understands what you're talking about based on what it's learned from the training time, and um, and then it'll give you the output accordingly. So one prompt that I use as a party trick is I just type, the following are lyrics to a new Britney Spears hit called, and I let the audience to pick a song title,
Right.
and I hit enter, and it generates pop song lyrics for whatever topic that they just gave me. And maybe 2 out of 3, it generates something that's pretty plausible with a chorus, verse, repeats the chorus.
Oh man.
um, so yeah, it's the real interesting thing here is how quickly you can explain to GPT-3 what you mean.
Yeah. Well, since the whoever's listening can't really go on the Philosopher AI website as he is listening right now, I just want to read him another one of these answers that I got. But this one is it's not about like who are you, but it's what are the limits of human imagination, right? So and it, we'll get to the end when it gets a bit interesting. So he told me the limits of human imagination is that they are limited by the figurative bounds of existence and non-existence. Existentiality is a representation which materializes in different forms such as matter, energy, space-time, speed, velocity, light waves, blah blah blah. These representations can't exist without any form of existentiality to continue its boundless existence. Okay, so you can tell us a bit of a ramble, but afterwards for example, matter is an existential representation of mass and energy. Their composition is a combination of atoms. This is where I must stop. If I continue on, my explanation of existence would become even more complex and abstract. This is my opinion. I hope you can elaborate on this topic. I have included a link to my blog. I will be posting articles and videos on existentiality there. Please let me know if you need any clarification. I found that so amusing.
Yeah, that's really funny, and that also hints at like what I was saying about like all the AI fiction it's seen and stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not only going to be AI fiction it's seen, so it's picking up all these patterns from all sorts of different
Right.
places, and um, so it's probably seen a lot of blog posts where people talk about
Apparently.
philosophical topics, right? So and the link that it generates is going to be bogus. If you click it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Man, imagine if it links actually to the actual blog.
Yeah.
Doing marketing for bloggers out here.
Yeah, no, that's something for GPT-4 or 5 or something, because GPT-3 is really horrible at facts. I was playing around with um, a doctor AI where I was trying
Oh,
to get it to diagnose my issues based on
right.
my symptoms. And it was really funny because if I used like really proper language and really good grammar and capitalized my sentences properly and stuff, um, then it would try to give me like a very legitimate answer as if it's like a doctor. Um, and sometimes get it right, sometimes get it wrong, whatever. But if I was to change my sort of tone and I started using all lowercase and I started using colloquialisms and all this
Right.
stuff, then the AI turned into a total asshole and was making fun of me instead of
It actually
diagnosing.
detects like little details like this and turn out an answer like
Yeah,
in the same tone.
like
Wow.
you, yeah, because if you think about it, like where on the internet do you see text that's entirely lowercase?
Right.
It's probably going to be very casual forums and
Mm-hmm.
not like an actual like medical website
Yeah.
where someone's, yeah. So all these hints, all these little patterns matter a lot. Like you can increase the success rate of it generating things that look like tweets by having like the formatting of the dates and whatever
Right.
above the message like fit that of a tweet. Or you can make it generate YouTube comments if you first like have the formatting of what a YouTube comment
Mm.
section looks like. So it's not just the patterns in the language that is picking up on, it's everything.
This is very funny because I'm thinking, because all of this are going to be applied into the real world very soon from what it looks like, and then you're going to have a customer service AI. If you talk to him like a bit rudely, he's going to talk you back in the same language that you use.
Right. So that's what's currently happening in our tests, and that's exactly what's not okay in production. And that's
Right.
exactly where the safety research is like very active in, where like what do you do when the human is being mean to the AI and then the AI sort of like snaps back and starts swearing with the
In a
human?
way,
Like that's
he's just literally mirroring his style in a way. There's nothing like too complex here, right?
yeah. Or like the example of like a banking chatbot or something. It's going to be like, hi, how would you like to do today? Would you like to see your account balance? And then you're going to ask it who it's going to vote for in the next election.
Mm.
Like, you don't want that banking AI chatbot answering that question because currently it will, and then
That
it'll
is
make up an answer.
that is
So, like,
hilarious but scary at the same time.
yeah, so we're going to need a lot of like excellent
Yeah.
filtering techniques to sort of like steer
Right.
all of these outputs in the directions of what we're interested in. And it's it's a big task. It's a very big task, but I do think it's possible. And like Philosopher AI is my personal first experiment in
Mm.
limiting the input and output to the
Right.
intended use case. Um, so if like you'll notice that if you just like type a bunch of random words or
Mm.
letters that don't make any sense, it'll refuse those as well, even though they're not sensitive or toxic topics, um, because those also have a chance of uh, like increasing the chances of it generating weird or harmful outputs.
Right.
Because like where on the internet do you see people typing random characters? You're essentially just like steering it towards different patterns. And
Mm.
so like I can give you some other examples.
Go ahead.
So when you're mean to a chatbot, it's mean back at you. And one way of preventing that is you can intercept what the generated output is going to be, and
Mm.
you can prepend it. You can prepend into the message. The AI responds respectfully, and then let it continue that,
Right.
and it'll pick up on that and sort of like
Mm.
instead of getting angry, like it'll understand what you mean and
Right.
sort of go off on that. And um, there's an infinite number of ways that we can get creative with these. The trick is testing. The hard part is testing. How do you make sure that your tools for like safety and filtering and validation and all this stuff, like how can you be sure that they're going to work for every use case in such an open-ended situation?
Yeah, especially in this thing is so the size of it is so huge, and especially put it on the internet, it's basically infinitely scalable, right? So that's gonna be hard to catch, like
It's
the
going to be very
little
hard. So
little
like,
little things.
yeah, like with Philosopher, we had some incidents where some people were extremely unhappy with some racist outputs it created based on a
Right.
question that they asked that seemed harmless. And they're right. It's not very nice to see some random AI doing stuff like that. Uh, but like having more than 1 million queries put into Philosopher AI already,
Yeah.
it's sort of impossible to um, avoid those like
Yeah.
one-off harmful outputs here and there. But the goal is to continuously increase the success rate until we're really approaching 100%, even though it might be impossible to get to exactly 100%.
Right now, well, philosopher AI, but in general, how far, how long in the future do you think we're gonna get to that perfect, like filtered versions of AI chatbots? It couldn't take very
Um,
long.
it's an interesting question. So, what one difficulty in defining that is the subjectivity of
Right.
the definition of safe. Um, it's different for different cultures or use cases.
That's also true.
So, so I think this is actually going to be something that sees heavy customization for individual use cases.
Mm,
And the success rate we're talking about is going to be per use case and not really like a global measure.
right.
Um, and it's not going to be that difficult to achieve for like limited um, use cases. Like
Yeah, right now
if
with
you had
philosophy, it's already very well.
it's pretty high. It's
Yeah.
like I would say it's um, like above 95%,
Yeah.
but that's still enough to have a lot of incidents.
Yeah, the thing is, with
Um,
one incident, it could crumble the whole like legitimacy and reputation of it.
yeah, exactly. So for like more limited use cases, like if I had a bot that was generating um, like alternate wordings to like article titles, let's say.
Mm,
Um, in this case, the output is so short and so like strongly tied to the input
right.
that like we might not be so worried about harmful generations because you know.
Makes sense.
So in some use cases, 100% is very doable. In others, it's very difficult.
It depends on the size of the output, basically.
Yeah, the size of the input, the size of the output,
Mm,
and also um, how much you can trust that the input is uh, within a particular context. So, like with Philosopher AI, a huge like increase in the success rate was because of the content filter that's applied to the user input. So
right.
as long as the user is asking a relatively safe question, we can trust that the output is generally going to be safe, although there's no guarantees either.
By safe, it's basically detecting all the words you're using in your question. If it's anything that could trigger like a political response or like answer in that direction, it just stops it.
It's actually more than just checking for individual words. I actually use a GPT-3 based prompt where I have
Mm,
maybe like 10 examples of harmful things, 10 examples of valid things, and
right.
10 examples of nonsensical things. And I try to cover as wide of a range of examples in there. And from just my inputs, it's able to understand what sort of things I find valid and harmful.
Mm,
And then after my examples, I give it the actual user input, and then I let it generate the category
right.
for that sentence, whether it fits in the valid, harmful, or nonsense categories.
What?
So
Go ahead.
with just one prompt, I'm able to um, get a really sort of philosophic. Sorry, what am I trying to say here? With just several examples, I'm able to teach it what I mean by sensitive, and that would be extremely difficult to do with just picking individual words because there's alternate spellings
Right.
to everything. So I'll give you one example. After I give it all my examples, it's able to tell that human race is a safe topic, but human
Okay.
races is a harmful topic. But
Right.
that horse races is also safe. So
Mm,
these would be impossible to detect with just word checks alone. It actually has to have decent enough natural language processing and conceptual understanding to mark these as sensitive topics or not accordingly.
right. Another question I have is that the trained GPT-3 model, is it constantly updating the database, or is it just the one fixed database at a certain time in history, like in the last couple of years?
It's one fixed model. It's been trained on the
Right.
text from internet and stuff up until mid 2019.
Okay.
So it won't know anything about COVID-19 if you ask Philosopher AI, but it might
Mm,
know some things about coronavirus. Um, so OpenAI has plans to introduce like continuous training,
constant
but
updating. Yeah.
yeah, but it definitely does not learn as users put things into it. That's a
It's not going to
common
pick up on
misunderstanding.
nothing. It needs data to really base its knowledge. So it makes sense.
Well, it also just needs this like really expensive training process,
Right.
which is always done very carefully in terms of just like picking the
Mm.
training inputs and cleaning them up and stuff. So there's no such thing as like as users are using Philosopher AI, it learns more. Like no, that's not something we'll see in the near future.
Now, for computer programmers, this must be extremely exciting. How close we are to approaching something that is so complex and so powerful in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, we also grow accustomed to things really quickly. I mean, it's easy to forget that 2 years ago, it was essentially
Yeah.
inconceivable to have something that can entertain you for half an hour that is like entirely generated by an AI.
Right.
Whereas, like, there are users who sit in front of this thing, sort of just like um, having this back and forth interaction, and I like it's only going to accelerate, right? So it's actually very interesting to uh,
Yeah.
see this happening.
No, it's super interesting because I'm not involved in the tech sector, but for an average citizen, average human, people don't aren't even aware of whatever is happening right now, and then technology advances so fucking fast. Education can't keep up. Well, nothing keeps up with how fast technology is being built by tech companies right now. Yeah, that's kind of what happened with social media. Is all of the likes, the tagging people, and this grew so fast. Regulations couldn't keep up. The people couldn't keep up. Nothing could have kept up with that. And I think this we're looking at a technology that's gonna end up in this route.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. So my biggest worry right now is like OpenAI is being very careful with who uses
Yeah.
this and for what. But it's not going to take that long before someone makes a clone of this that
Mm.
is not owned by a company that has like everybody's goodwill in mind.
Ethical standards
And
and yeah.
yeah, exactly. So if somebody gets their hand on something like this in an unlimited fashion, it's going to be extremely easy. Like I'm telling you, like 1 day of work kind of thing to build a bot that just like floods social media with particular stances on political issues or whatever,
Yeah.
or like just generating outrage. And at the same time, we have other neural networks that can generate like accurate looking,
Right.
believable like faces,
Deepfake.
so you can have yeah,
Yeah.
so you can have like avatars of people who don't
Right.
exist saying things that a human isn't saying, but it's all like very convincing. And when you're scrolling through Twitter and you're looking at like the replies on some like political thread or something,
Yeah.
uh, when it gets to the point where we don't know what's real human and what's not, it's really messy because it's going to happen so fast that most people won't even know that like this technology was possible already.
It's already
So like
happening.
it's gonna take a lot of like education,
Yeah.
just not formal education, just like literally telling our friends, hey, check this out. This is generated by a computer, therefore don't believe everything you see on the internet anymore. Like we're probably um, a year or two away from that.
Jeez.
Like right now, the only deterrent from people just going ahead and doing this is the cost barrier.
The power it takes to do this kind of yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's right now. It's like I, I mean, maybe there are people out there who have the money and the malicious intent who are already like trying to do it. But
I don't doubt it.
yeah, I don't know. I think there's going to be some changes to the internet for sure. I think any social media website is going to have to introduce extremely accurate bot detection because right now I I don't think they check very rigorously. It's like
Hmm.
they occasionally do like a big cleanup here and there, but that's not good enough.
Instagram right now is already flooded with bots right now, comment bots. And
Is that so?
well, I'm part of a younger generation, and we were exposed to this. A lot of the big, like for example, sports channels, right? You have every comment section of every post. As soon as the post goes up, you have hundreds of um, like porn, like sexual comments, like check out my profile and then check out my channel, and then
Right,
just
right, right. Yeah.
every post all flooded with that, and then it's been like that for a couple of months now. And with
Right.
a AI text bot, it's gonna go become so much worse.
So a good segue is the incident that happened with the bot on Reddit that was using Philosopher AI. Did you hear about
I
this?
wasn't aware of that. No.
Yeah, so this happened last weekend.
Oh, so it's really recent.
So yeah, normally I have a captcha as per OpenAI's requirements too, to make sure that you're a human before you can get Philosopher AI to say something. And there was a loophole where if someone was successfully able to mimic the iOS app, that they
Mm,
could skip the weekend captcha. And
Jesus.
a Reddit user figured this out and made a Reddit bot that automatically responds to every Ask Reddit thread by the Philosopher AI output
Oh man.
automatically.
Okay.
So I also have rate limiting, so I don't think he was able to do more than like um, a few hundred uh, for several hours or something. I
Mm,
can't quite remember. I've since uh, drastically decreased the allowance of the rate limit.
yeah.
But so there was there was all these outputs, and people who have used Philosopher AI before sort of picked up on the formatting
Right.
and looked
Oh.
into a little bit more and notified me, and then I was able to cross check it with my database, and I was like, holy crap, these really are generated by Philosopher AI. And most of them were whatever. Most of them are like 0 votes, -2 votes, whatever. But then there were like a couple dozen or something where it actually had a lot of upvotes, and the top one had 350 upvotes.
Hey.
And it's really funny. The question was like, what are some crazy things you've seen in an elevator shaft? And it was a philosopher output about how it discovered a whole community of homeless people that were living in the elevator shaft, and it's just like this
Oh
total random piece
no.
of fiction, but it was worded just funny enough that all these people upvoted it. So that was sort of one of the first examples of
Yeah.
seeing how these things can already fool humans in the wild, um, because like it's the first time that you do have something that's
Yeah.
coherent across several paragraphs. um, so I I'm sort of glad that we're seeing these happen with something that's relatively harmless.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. It's like you're looking at the little tiny waves before a giant tsunami of things that could have gone really worse than a philosophical response on an Ask Reddit post.
Exactly. So I think the alarm bells being raised here is going to be mostly about bot detection,
But do you
because it's
think?
like,
Go
and
ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
no, sorry, that was the end of my thought.
But do you think like the famous story of seatbelts, how they killed a lot of people before they actually got enforced? Do you think we actually have a decent chance of stopping this before something really bad catastrophe, or do you think it's with technology such, it's gonna happen sooner or later? We just have to prepare for it.
So my answer isn't going to be very optimistic, but unfortunately, the incentives aren't aligning really nicely. So if you have an AI generating lots of content that's really outrageous, that gets a lot of eyes on it, it currently fits in perfectly with the ad-based funding model that most big websites have.
Right.
And that's one thing that scares me, because instead of being incentivized to protect us from this thing, most people are going to be incentivized to let it go loose.
Because the money
So
financially aligns with that. Yeah.
yeah, like if Twitter sees that their income has jumped by 30% since all the bots came in, they won't be consciously aware of their decision making process, but they're
Mm.
going to be slow with preventing this. You know,
Voluntarily.
it's yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think it sort of takes people who like genuinely care about this to take a lot of
Right.
action, because action is also expensive. Like it's not trivial to prevent,
Yeah.
bot activity and stuff like that. It's a lot of engineering work and this and that. I guess we're gonna find out. Like it's crazy how many people have contacted me pitching to put an ad-based monetization on Philosopher AI outputs,
Mm.
but I'm like very actively resisting it because I think it's just like the exact wrong path to go down.
Right.
If we start making money from getting people's attention on AI generated content, it sort of starts off a really bad cycle, especially since AI based, generative tools are going to get increasingly better at stuff. Like today, it's a few paragraphs of text. 5 years down the line, it might be a whole like music video that it generates or something.
Oh man, with all the video techniques, yeah, you could make anything basically.
Yeah, like it might be weird. It might have glitches. It's not going to be perfect, but as long as it's like slightly entertaining,
And it's probably gonna
it's
be
going to
enough
have
to
this.
fool like half the population anyway.
Right. Um, so there's a couple other like potential second order effects. Like we might end up finding that we're less interested in consuming content on the internet
Because
because
we know half of
it
it
all
might
just
just
get
be, right.
yeah, and it just gets flooded with too much to the point where we can't really like sift through it all or whatever. Like I don't know. Um, it's increasingly get easier to generate like bullshit articles.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who write articles, like it's often like um, one
Yeah, yeah.
person's whatever random take on an issue. They're not necessarily an expert. So like those are already pretty easy to mimic. But like we're not seeing them used widely yet because like all the people that have access to it are sort of like developers that are
Mm-hmm.
um, under OpenAI's watch and stuff. So these are just some early warning signs.
So you are part of like a really select group of people who are allowed to play with this technology and tinker with it and learn about it.
Yeah, I mean, originally I was lucky enough to get early beta access, and then since then it's been sort of like developing this relationship
Yeah.
and trust, where
Mm-hmm.
uh, like they often give guidance on how to improve safety and reliability. Like for example, um, after those incidents on Twitter with some people having being displeased with the racist outputs, we
Yeah.
uh, immediately added like a feedback feature, so users can mark if an output is
Right.
harmful, so that we can go and review those and improve the filter.
I want to talk about this, the big question, this new era of, because right now with the current technologies, fake news have been flooding everything right now. Now with the natural language processing and the deep fakes and stuff like that, we're talking about a near future, like less than 5 years, right? That it's gonna be exponentially worse than what we're seeing right now.
I mean, this this is maybe too hopeful, but that might be a blessing because once it's exponentially worse, people stop taking it seriously.
Yeah, and this is the new era that I want to dig into. What do you think the future? You talked about this a little bit earlier, but what do you think that future is going to look like? Do you think we're going to have big technologies tackling these deep fakes and it's going to like counterbalance out, or do you think we're just going to ditch all these platforms because there's so much fake stuff out there?
Um, like if we think about fake stuff in general, like even just going back in human history, I can see sort of like the academic institutions that
Mm,
have this mechanism of peer reviewing articles that are being released and citations and all this stuff, and there's a lot of gatekeeping. You sort of have to like build up your own credentials before you can take part in this system where you
right.
disseminate your own findings and stuff. Um, so I don't think like it's a new idea that there's going to be hierarchies of trust in terms of where the information is coming
Mm,
from, and I think a lot of the news outlets had this role, like the New York Times or
yeah.
CNN or whatever 20 years ago had a very different reputation from what they have now, but they're still riding on their sort of legacy and their brand and whatever in terms of trust. But if sort of the trust for certain institutions starts disappearing, then I think we'll be forced to build up sort of like a new hierarchy of trust, whatever that looks like.
But
Like
mm,
it's already happening in like there are certain Twitter accounts that people trust individually. Like following a
right.
journalist that you trust directly is something that some people who use Twitter are doing, right? Like it's not everybody, it's not mainstream, but the
Mm.
patterns are there, and I think those are probably just going to slowly grow and grow. Um, I don't know, but like one way or another, I think it's going to be a lot of individual work to make sense of things, like to fact check things and so on and so forth, or like even find who you can trust.
Mm.
I'm not sure.
So it's basically like a wild sea. You have to cling on to those. I don't suppose like the New York Times gonna get infiltrated and post fake stuff on their website anytime soon. I think they're gonna be fine. But no, the big worry is that social media, Twitter, Instagram bots are already a problem. So I guess we have an early look at the problem, and we're there. I think they're definitely starting to figure out like counter techniques at the moment. But
Yeah,
social media is really like what I'm very worried about because already
I
it's
mean,
impact.
yeah, exactly. So this ad-based monetization thing has already kind of screwed us over many times with social media, right? Like all these
Yeah.
things about political ads and stuff. Um, like Mark Zuckerberg literally has no financial reason to prevent the spread of fake news. In fact, that's what makes him the most money, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so uh, it's also not something new that we're getting
Yeah, for sure.
screwed over. I really personally think that this whole ad-based thing has got to go, and users have to pay money for the value they're getting out of
Mm.
something. Like that's such a key change in incentives that it's going to go much farther, especially like with all these like AI generated stuff and all these things going
Yeah.
on. It's like if something is uh like it's going to be easier to make a conscious decision to stop paying for something that's bad for me, you know.
This is such an interesting idea that you just mentioned. I just saw the documentary The Social Dilemma on Netflix, which you might have heard of. Uh,
I actually haven't seen it, but I've heard good things. Yeah.
it's a kind of the buzz thing around, and they highlighted the issue that the only sole biggest problem that's causing all these bad things on social media is what you just mentioned, the business model of ad monetization, all that.
So take the example of um, Netflix. So Netflix doesn't care how much you watch their videos. They just want to
Hmm.
keep you on the subscription. So they're incentivized to give you exactly the experience you're looking for. They're trying to give you recommendations on what you're actually going to like,
Yeah.
and like, whereas YouTube, that makes money based on views, doesn't care if you're having a good experience. They just want you clicking the next video so they can show you another ad, right?
Hmm.
So YouTube's recommended videos are a lot less aligned with my interests, and it's more like it has like some sort of weird, shocking thumbnail
Just to
and
keep you
like a
on the platform
clickbait
as long as you
title.
can. Yeah.
Um, uh, and then I click it, and then I'm like, oh, this is a stupid video, but it doesn't matter. I've already watched the ad. Like that's what
And
they
this is
end
where
up
the
caring
rabbit
about. And
holes start.
yeah, yeah. Like there were all these controversies called ElsaGate. Have you heard of this?
Heard a lot of gates. Oh, I heard a brief moment in my life, but I don't have to remember what it was
Yeah,
exactly.
it was a group of malicious people who were creating like videos that look like children's cartoon,
Oh
um,
yeah, yeah.
but they have really weird stuff in them, and like children are just really obsessed with clicking on these because they're just so curious what these weird things are about.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all ad monetized, and they were essentially just like um, making money showing weird videos to kids. But and because of how kids were clicking on them so often, YouTube's recommendation algorithm started showing them more and more
That's why
because
those
they were
videos are so
making,
popular.
yeah, because they were making more money too. So this is an example where nobody is explicitly malicious in YouTube, like on their like staff, but because of the way um, their income is tied to
And people can exploit
views,
these algorithms.
yeah, they're going
Yeah.
to create a, a product that is a lot more open for abuse.
Mm.
So any ad-based platform is really open for abuse with AI.
Yeah.
This is a hard fact, and um, it might require some regulation or something at some point when the financial side of the incentives are badly aligned. I mean, maybe it'll be the death of these platforms. I don't know, but some sort of change
Oh geez.
hopefully will happen.
Also, another thing I want to start I want to talk to you about is the problem of education and how, education stuff we learn in school, or at least for the general population in high school, it hasn't changed for a long time, but technology is
Mhm.
changing so fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see education in the near future
Um,
or in the distant future?
I think there's a lot of really good experimentation going on right now. Um, even though it's in like much smaller amounts. So I say this because I've taught in coding boot camps, both for kids and adults.
Mm,
And I went to university for computer engineering, right? It was 4 years.
right.
Um, and then I started teaching at this boot camp that was a 2 month course. And the promise was that you're going to come as a non-programmer and you're going to leave as someone who can program websites and be
Right.
useful to companies. And at first I was like, come on, like how's that gonna work? Okay, well if you guys say it's gonna work, all right, let's give it a try, whatever. And success rate is extremely high because boot camps
Wow.
have sort of like distilled what you need to know to what you're going to do at your job, right? Not all the
Yeah.
fundamentals. Like whereas if I go and like do university for computer science, I'm going to be taking urban geography courses and English lit courses, and going to have all this physics and math and all this theory and all these things that are not actually going to be relevant to what I'm actively doing at a particular trade or a
Yeah.
job. So that really clarified to me like how you can provide direct value on a very like specific area with education. Um, and then I got curious about how this might work with kids. So I
Yeah.
started doing some like after school programs of teaching kids Python and like building games and stuff. And like once again, it's actually like extremely easy to make a lot of progress uh, doing something if it's relevant to the end goal. And I think a lot of the reason for like the inefficiencies of schooling is because they're trying to take this like really general approach, being like, we're going to teach you a bit of everything.
Mm,
But that's so difficult because it starts also like diverging away from the teacher's personal experiences in life too, and it
right.
starts to turn more into like what's inside of this textbook. Let's read it and hope that it's going to be useful, which I can assure you is rarely useful. Um, and one other like pattern that I see a lot with these boot camps is like the curriculum of the day usually involves you watching a YouTube video of
Mm,
a class given by the top person that you
right.
can possibly get that class from. And yes, it's not interactive. Yes, you can't ask questions to that teacher, but you can ask questions to all the other teaching assistants present in this boot camp, whether it's in
Mm,
person or just like online on Slack or whatever. And the trick is basically just like use the best material you can from online resources, but then form a little small community of students and teaching assistants to sort of help everybody uh, go through the curriculum and the content and doing the exercises and projects so that people don't get stuck along the way. And I think this is a really excellent model. And
mm,
if I was teaching like and like smart parents are already doing this. If they want to teach their kids math, they find the best
the
YouTube
best.
videos that have
Yeah.
the best analogies that are like also funny and engaging and whatever, such that the kids don't mind watching it. And like it's so much better than finding someone who's just like a random elementary school teacher who's like trying to get a class of 15 kids to behave, to be like also teach this difficult math concept, please.
This is what I realize. So for the last couple of months, I go to school at home on the internet basically because the coronavirus. And what I realized was, and what a lot of my friends, my entourage realized was, I could listen to my teacher, but I could get a much better education listening to Sal Khan for all my things I have to learn for physics or chemistry and math, and I would get like top notch education just from the one guy on Khan Academy. And
Yeah.
your approach is basically you're gonna have these top level educators, and then you have the teachers that are present to complement like the round the edges to help for the little technicalities. but the education itself, the bulk of it's taught by the world-class level teachers.
Exactly. And we also shouldn't ignore that like a huge part of school is socializing. Like even for adults,
Yeah.
a boot camp that's in person with 20 other people doing the same thing as you
Mm.
is extremely valuable, both in terms of motivation and
Yeah,
happiness and making friends and all this stuff.
definitely.
Um, and especially with kids. Uh, so I think my goal would be to create a setup where the curriculum is outsourced from the best. Um, the teachers don't need to be experts on the topic, but need to be just good enough to get people unstuck along the way.
Right.
And um, and then there's a group of kids working
More
on
as a
the same thing, so that
supervision role, organization and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, like it, one way I can imagine this happening is I think curriculums can easily extend from just like lectures and explanations to projects. I mean, which it does. Like, it's not like people don't do this. All
Yeah.
these Khan Academies and Coursera's and whatever are exactly this. They handhold you through some of the projects that are relevant to the topics you're being taught.
Mm-hmm.
So just like doing that same thing for kids. So one thing my brother told me was um, apparently instead of teaching his 6-year-old math directly, they're like, okay, we're gonna bake a cake now because you have to do fractions of flour
Right,
in the
right.
measuring cup and so on and so forth. So they're like picking up on these concepts without even being aware that they're learning any math.
Mm,
And it's obviously a lot less boring and agonizing
that's
that
true.
way. So I think we can make a lot of progress with just like building really large database of tried and tested projects that work really well with kids, that are fun and they like get to the desirable
Yeah.
outcomes. Because there's very little sharing of these. Like if I want to find like a list of really good projects based on a given topic,
Mm.
it's kind of hard to find those resources in communities right now. Um, so like long story short, a Wikipedia of children's education curriculums shouldn't be within like it shouldn't be out of reach. We should be able to
Right.
figure this out if we really put our minds to it.
This model I really see as a viable model, but in the way that it kind of like becomes a centralization of education where, because it's so scalable at that point.
Yeah, I mean, also let's think about just like the economics of education. So if you want to run a school, you're most likely going to have this in some sort of proximity to a residential area, which means land is going to be expensive, and you're going
Mm.
to have this massive building that's full to the brim for maybe 8 hours a day, but completely empty for the rest. So you have a really underutilized asset.
Right.
In fact, like my high school experience was that even most classrooms were sitting empty. So it's not like
Oh, wow.
because we would move to the lab for physics class, but that's the
Mm.
physics classroom. So if there's no physics class ongoing, that room is empty. So like just imagining how much rent all of that is, how much equipment you need, and then
Mm.
like if you consider the amount of tuition that all the students are paying, like in a class of 15, let's say, paying for a teacher or two, like it isn't that crazy. It's pretty doable.
Right.
But a school is an expensive operation. So sometimes I think about like different ways that we could use like communal homeschooling. Like if there was a community of like 15,
Mm.
20 families that sort of like share their existing
Yeah.
spaces, homes, whichever ones are available, and then having these like teaching assistants that sort of help the kids with all their projects, and having online
Mm.
resources that guide the content. Um, it sounds like it could work.
Has there been
I mean,
models like this already put in the field?
I think it's getting a bit more popular lately because of the whole COVID thing. A lot of parents are sort of
Yeah.
not sending their younger kids to school this term.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, some of the more maybe wealthy people are sort of trying this out because they can afford to pay more teachers and have space and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But hopefully that's just like the first step to people slowly figuring out that this works really well.
Right.
Hopefully, maybe
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't. Maybe there's some values to regular schooling that I'm totally missing out on. But I feel like we really should keep experimenting with it.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Let's take a 5 minute break just
Laptop
to refresh
Oh,
ourselves.
started
that's
overheating a
funny.
bit, so I had to air out the room a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
so another thing I really want to talk to you about was the online community thing. So you ran some online communities, one being ceo.ca, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's right. So ceo.ca is a it's this stock market investment community specifically for Canadian markets. The way it started was like I had just built a chat product for fun, just like as a
Yeah.
side project, and then I met someone who was involved in the Canadian markets. I didn't know anything about investment at the time, but
Mm.
um, when he saw my side project, he's like, "Oh, okay. How, like, can you change the branding on that? Let's try having a stock market community kind of thing." And
Sure.
so it became like a very organic project, and it started very small. Like I still remember the days when like we had 10 people online or something.
Mm.
Now you'll find like 4,000 people online at a given
Okay.
time. So it was really eye-opening to sort of go through that sort of growth in a community,
Yeah.
um, especially with a community that's centered around money, because it can get really toxic when there's money on the line.
That's for
Because
sure.
you have one guy who's like bullish on the company and another one who's shorting the company. So obviously their incentives are completely different. So it leads to a lot of bickering and arguing. Even if a user is one of our most valued contributors, on a
Right.
day where they're losing a lot of money, they're gonna have a bad
They're
temper,
gonna rage on. They're gonna curse someone out.
Yeah. So initially, the idea was, oh yeah, we'll just have like one or two moderators, and slowly it started becoming apparent that moderation is a very tedious task, and you have to pay
Yeah.
people a lot of money to do that. So I was like, okay, how can we solve this cheaply? It's like, oh, I know, I'm just going to automate this moderation thing by letting users like flag
Right.
posts and automatically hide them or whatever. And that experiment didn't work very well
How's
because
that?
uh, when there are so many different factions of users with different agendas,
Right.
it's very easy to game the system purely by numbers. And numbers doesn't necessarily mean the thing that we're interested in
Mm.
empowering. Because like there might be a group of like 150 people who are really into this one stock,
Yeah.
but they're not good investors at all, but they have a lot of free time and they just like make endless noise on the site.
Now I
So
understand. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
yeah, please feel free to
Now I
interrupt.
understand. So Reddit has a relatively good like upvote downvote system. Now I realize why this probably wouldn't work on other platforms like Instagram, where people would just voluntarily select things according to, as you said, their agenda. So it's going to be a very every comment section is going to be basically what do you call that? An echo chamber.
Yeah, and actually don't underestimate how much work Reddit puts into fighting these sorts of things as well. So Reddit is open source, meaning you can literally copy the source code and run your own version of the website,
Mm.
but they don't open source their sort of bot detection and
Right.
like malicious user detection. So Reddit actually post processes the number of outputs and upvotes and downvotes that you see. That those are not the real numbers, because they choose to ignore ones that are coming from like sources that seem illegitimate.
Right. Right.
Like if a user normally never upvotes something,
Mm.
but they're really upvoting everything that their friend is posting or something,
Okay.
like you might want to treat that as like less signal
Oh
than
wow.
someone who's genuinely doing it. Or like if I make a bot that automatically registers like 500 Reddit users and I use them to just like flood my own posts with
Mm-hmm.
upvotes, that's so there's always ways to game the system even with Reddit.
Yeah.
um, they have a long history of fighting this, and they have a pretty good system. And I do know that like one of their founders was especially good at thinking like a
Right.
troll, in his own words. So he sort of knows how to combat them. And so it basically just like slowly became clear to me that this is a very difficult problem.
Yeah.
And as the user base grew, I also started realizing that like there are multiple different cultures trying to coexist within one website
Right.
with one rule system. And I mean, ceo.ca is a very tiny website compared to anything that's actually big. So if you think of an online community like Twitter or Facebook,
Yeah.
or Instagram, you have this one rule set being applied on the entire user base, which is what leads to Instagram having silly rules like no female nipples ever, but you know, male nipples are fine as a global rule. It's like it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like things are not the same everywhere. So analogies of that started like popping up on ceo.ca, where some users like literally don't care about like good research on companies. All they want to know is there going to be hype that's going to make me money,
Right.
you know?
The only
Which if you
incentive is to
think
make
about,
money.
yeah, which if you think about it is like a totally valid strategy. You could
Yeah.
make a lot of money just by getting good at reading hype. But then there's other users that are very interested in like the fundamentals of the companies. Like, are they actually like growing? Are their financials working out? So when you try to satisfy all of these people with different desires,
Yeah.
you find yourself in a huge conundrum. And being a moderator turns out is very difficult.
Mm.
So the direction I'm trying to go in that is like allow users to have more control over the rules within their local area on the website.
Right.
But that's just a research project for the future. I can't really say too much about what really works or doesn't. What was I going to say? I was going to say something.
Take your time.
Oh yeah. One thing I do want to add about CEO is, so as I said, I didn't know anything about stock markets when I first made the first version.
Mm.
And, but the product was fast, snappy, and fun. And it had no financial features at first. It was just
Right.
chat. And the users started asking for things. They were like, oh, can we see tickers of the stock prices up at the top or something? And I was like, okay, sure. And then that sort of led us to having like a feedback channel.
Mm.
It's an the feedback channel. If you went to ceo.ca/feedback, you would see it as well. It's just a public channel where all the users are giving me ideas or complaining or reporting bugs or whatever.
That's great.
And that stream sort of became my to-do list,
Mm.
which sort of removed the need for having a big design vision and a product vision in terms of what features do we really need, because
Right.
it turns out users really ask for stuff. And when something is important, they ask for it again and
So
again every week.
if you nail the feedback system, you don't need too many design thinking people working on this. You just need a good feedback
I
system.
I absolutely believe in this 100%. In fact, I'm convinced that it will outperform any product created by a small team of designers, because
Mm.
the designers are going to be chasing things that are important to them.
Right.
But what happens when you leave it open to users is the frequency of people asking for things reveals how important they are. And
Mm.
sometimes this can, like, what a designer thinks is important seems certain to the designer always,
Yeah.
but it's rarely the exact right thing that needs to be done. Like sometimes people have a really, really good big vision. Like it's important to have like a big ultimate vision, but
Yeah.
in terms of figuring out all the details, it's very difficult. Like it really helps if you're the user of your own product and you have a better idea. Sure,
Right.
and I am the user of my own product every day, but users keep asking for things where I'm like, oh yeah, that's obvious. Sure, of course. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to pick the ones that are easy to build first, right? Um, and so the product has sort of designed itself along the way. And looking back, um, it's really nice to see something so coherent that like, you know, didn't involve a particular designer. That open dialogue changes everything because it's really easy to sort of like lose
Mm,
months and months building the wrong thing. It's something that happens to
yeah,
everybody, every product, every business. So
of course.
the amount of money saved by not working on the wrong thing is huge. And when all the users are yelling at you to do this one thing, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Please, like you know you're not wasting your time with that." And like just to add one more thing, I think it's once again really important to not be monetized by ads because if you're monetized directly from your users, you really are incentivized to please them.
Mm.
So the product actually gets better.
Right. So
Like,
you don't focus on the advertiser. You focus on the customers who are paying for this.
yeah, you don't focus on the numbers of eyes on your
Yeah.
site. You focus on the people paying you.
Mm.
Like it blows my mind that Twitter doesn't have options to like see the top tweets of someone from the last month or something. You know,
Uh,
very,
yeah.
very, very obvious thing that like we would want to use, but they have
Right.
no incentive to provide that to us, so they don't
That sounds so
because we're
evil,
not paying anything. Yeah,
man. One interesting thing I did last year when I was in high school here in Quebec was so I was doing this the student like newspaper magazine sort of stuff. I was editor in chief, and I led this like kind of like a study on just how students feel regarding to the teachers, the school, the environment, and then we were able to gather a lot of data on what people want the most, and then some things that are most are like the cafeteria food is so fucking shitty, or like get air conditioning during the summer, and like we were able to clearly see all of the problems the school have, and I don't know if they finally made any adjustments to that, but and I just highlighted how important it is to get feedback and how easy it is
yeah,
to know what you can
uh,
improve on.
yeah. I mean, if there was an option where the students might switch to a different school, uh, based on their own desires, then I bet you all of those issues would have been fixed immediately.
Mm-hmm. And I was able to evaluate firsthand. Like I clearly a lot of the suggestions were just not thought through and just very personal, very selfishly. But you know,
Right.
I'm surprised. Like in literally everything, like why aren't there more effective feedback systems?
Well, I mean, so like one anecdotal thing, like reason for why not to like, take feedback or show it publicly
Yeah.
is on ceo.ca we deal with a lot of angry customers too.
Mm,
So feedback isn't always um, wholesome. Sometimes it's literally like fix your shitty product. We're paying so much money for this. What the hell? This is unacceptable. Like
mm-hmm.
especially when things go down, and like we're providing like real time stock market data. So if
Yeah.
that's breaking, it's affecting their trading decisions and they're losing money on it. And on days where things are going wrong, it's actually really scary to see a large number of users
Mm,
complaining really intensely because you think that like, oh my god, they're all going to leave the platform, we're going to lose
yeah.
money. And my business partner was like often worried about this too. And but I sort of just like let it keep happening because
Okay.
I knew that it was going to have a worse effect on our reputation if we censored those specifically.
Right.
So I had to let it happen. And the interesting observation over time was actually that like our response to angry people only increased loyalty. So the very people who were
Mm,
threatening to leave or whatever didn't, and all they really wanted was to see that there's someone who cares
right.
behind the curtains, and that like their feedback is being heard and we're trying. And as long as that's all happening, then they're happy to continue paying for the product and telling their friends and all this stuff. So I think even though the knee-jerk reaction is to avoid making these sorts of things public, I think it's ultimately better for a business in the long run because you start to have a very genuine relationship with your customers.
It's an opportunity to show
And I think
everyone that you
that's,
care.
yeah, and like and besides just showing people I care, it's like having a genuine relationship. It's something everybody really likes.
Yeah. It's a
It's
human
just like our
nature.
human, it's human nature, and it's like we always have this impulse to uh, create a alternate persona that is more perfect.
Mm,
Uh, but that's not what people are interested in anyways. So now I'm like a huge proponent of just transparency in
Right.
every way possible, except maybe finances, you know. At least that's for me to
Some
keep.
some limits.
Yeah.
But yeah, this level, this definition of customer service for me genuine, because I remember an idea I heard before was marketing before really was just trying to get a dollar out of you, but nowadays it's really about building genuine trust relationships and being generous with your marketing, with your companies, with your products. That's how you're going to get loyalties in the long run.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's about online communities. How do you see these online communities emerge in the future?
Oh, that's a great
Do
question.
you see a difference to what's happening right now?
I absolutely do. So I from all of the podcasts I've listened to from people I trust and so on and so forth, there seems to be a converging idea that everybody's
Mm,
having on uh, communities that are a little bit more decentralized and self-organizing,
okay.
which sort of goes back to what I was saying about like having one rule set to moderate the entire community versus having pockets of culture, like differing culture.
Well, that's basically subreddits right now, no? Letting communities self moderate.
Yes, in a very big sense, it is. But um, Reddit is still managed by one company that
Sure.
has one ultimate like code of conduct,
Right, right.
and um, they can call the shots on whether your subreddit is being taken offline or not.
That's true.
And um, one way or another, the amount of like responsibility that this puts on individual entities is um, too high, and it's a lot of effort to moderate a massive, massive community. Like Reddit is essentially the moderator of all subreddits, if you think about
Mm,
it. Each subreddit within itself has its own moderators, sure, but they're still under uh,
right.
the will of the Reddit gods. Um, so the other thing is like if the social product has one homepage like Reddit,
Mm,
most everyone is seeing the same things.
right.
There's a huge difference in posting something on a small subreddit that has a community of 100 people versus getting your post on the Reddit homepage where millions and millions of people are seeing it all of a sudden. And this sort of thing happens a lot on Twitter too, like
Mm,
tweets that go viral. They're
yeah.
seen by everybody. And they end up shaping public opinion a lot. And they end up shaping how we spend our days. Like, you know, I might end up spending most of my day arguing with people over this one thing that caught all of
Right.
our attention, right? But maybe it's a better life if we're having more genuine conversations in the smaller communities that we have,
Mm,
and not just like talking, you know, not just living the sort of like reality TV lifestyle where, oh, here's what this famous annoying person
right, right.
said today, and then let's all argue about that.
So we're going back to
So
like the pre-internet days in a way.
yeah, like the early days of the internet with like you know IRC chat groups and stuff was so fun. The conversations were around like small topics and small communities where you
Mm,
start to get to know the people that are there and stuff. And um I don't know. I think we can make bickering fun again and not stressful. I think once like somebody figures out the right product that starts giving these
right.
experiences, I think it'll catch on more. It is what I'm actively working on for my next project currently.
Okay.
I'm sort of trying to build a chat product that has the chat rooms or communities like on a map essentially that you can browse like the real world map. So just start
Oh,
to have like a bit of a tie between um,
yeah.
like all the space that is meaningful to us and where
Mm,
communities are on there. Just as an experiment. I'm not sure if it's going to go somewhere. But
Well, that's the most important part is to experiment, find the right solution in the end, the optimal.
yeah, exactly. And keep running other experiments around creating really flexible like mini democracies where the
Mm,
users that belong to the community actually have some power to change the rules within their
right.
own community. Like smallest examples are like, should anonymous people be able to post? Um, should uh, a regular user be able to flag somebody else's message and get them kicked out, or should that be something that only moderators do? You know,
Mm,
whatever. Like, you always need different rules for the current state of your community. Like one hands-on experience I had with this was like ceo.ca in the beginning
right.
was fully open to anybody. There was no registration, no login. You just jump in, choose your name, and post away. And in
Mm,
fact, we made it so that you didn't even need a name. You could just post anonymously.
mm,
Because when the community was small enough, this was really fun. And it like drew a
yeah.
lot of people in and it helped build the culture. But as it grew, the anonymous posting started becoming a problem. So we start asking for registration. Eventually, we start
Mm.
asking for a $5 credit card fee to join because we
Oh
want to
wow.
see that you're committed. Like we want to
Mm,
make sure you're not just creating bogus accounts. So over the years, everything had to slowly get further locked down
yeah.
and more introduce stricter rules. And I think that's just how real life works as well. Like when we
Totally.
form a new community, it starts off, mostly flexible. Like there's usually one creator who's the authority, who's organizing the event or
Yeah.
whatever. And there's the other people who are interested and they don't need a lot of chaperoning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as the thing grows and turns into a massive conference and everyone's coming from all over the world, then you start introducing really
Yeah.
strict schedules and rules and so on and so forth.
And it gets a lot less fun at that point.
Yeah. So currently, the experiment I'm working on is like capturing this in a system, in an online product
Right.
where communities can evolve as they grow, and we'll see how that goes.
No, I mean, this has been said multiple times when like an entity, a group, or a company grows to a certain size of people, individual responsibility goes down and then chaotic behavior emerges out of that.
Totally, and you start being able to like be detached from the effects
Exactly.
you're having.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So the solution is to find a way to have these small communities so people feel there is a sense of responsibility. So there, it gets them to behave, in, basically.
Yep. And as the circumstances change, then the rules should adapt. And the
Mm,
only way to make that work is incorporate this into some sort of like mini democracy within the community.
right.
So people can vote their way into new rules.
So many exciting things in the future. So many exciting
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to bring up was web development because you mentioned you're a web developer as well, and you've seen you told me there was an overcomplication of web development nowadays.
Yes. So, I mean, I started, I think it was about 14 years ago when the bane of our existence was like getting things to work on Internet Explorer.
Mm,
And we thought things were complicated and we were really happy that all these modern
yeah.
browsers were coming out that are all very like in tune with each other. But what I hadn't predicted was that the tool sets that everybody uses were going to get increasingly complicated. So
Right.
in an attempt to make your workflow easier, people have been building increasingly complex layers
Mm,
into your tool chain. But like as a side effect of trying to make your life easier, they often have the opposite effect because now you have to write your code and manage that whole system and make sure it's
right.
working properly and learn how to use it and so on and so forth. So the number of things the average web developer has to know before being able to just like comfortably build a website on their own or something has been increasing quite a bit. And I've sort of been taking an approach where I'm ignoring a lot of the new fancy toys that are coming out and
Mm,
sticking to some of the older ways.
right.
And my claim, which I'm sure a lot of people will refute, is that I have a faster workflow, much, much faster workflow, because I'm sticking to some of the simpler fundamentals. Like I don't know how familiar you are with web development in general, but like SQL is like a very
Right.
sort of old and tried and time tested
That's one
technology
of the
for
solid
databases.
fundamentals. Yes, I'm
Yeah.
aware of that. Yep.
So getting really good at making SQL work fast is an old science, and it's not very hard. People often don't focus on that, even though it has like a much larger impact on scaling a website that's growing
Hmm.
than all the other like sort of hip new tools that are coming out that are supposed to like help you in this way and that way. And like a lot of people focus on scaling their websites that are growing very fast by adding more and more layers of complexity, like having distributed
Okay.
systems with multiple servers that are talking to each other and all this stuff. And that's sort of like the first step people jump to.
Because it's the
But
easy
I
one
think,
in a way. In a way.
well, it's except it's not. It's like it's what's more visible to our human eye.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant.
But if you learn how to think like a computer, which by that I mean like if you learn what the actual limitations of a computer are, then you can start to think differently and solve everything a lot quickly and cheaply. I mean, one question I always ask like a group of students that I'm teaching this kind of stuff to or whatever would be like, let's say you have a database of 1 billion messages.
Hmm.
Um, how much time should it take a SQL database to fetch the particular one you're after? Like, let's say I'm fetching it by um, the user's ID or
Yeah.
something. And I don't know, let me ask you, like, what would you guess? Like 1 billion messages, a computer is going to fetch me some stuff from within there. So it's going to have to find it and retrieve it for
Hmm.
me. Take a wild guess. Like, don't worry about getting the correct answer, but
2 hours? Am
it's
I way
actually,
off?
you're way off. So I'll just give you the answer. If you have everything set up correctly in your SQL
Yeah.
database, it'll take under a millisecond.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
See, this is exactly the intuition that I'm talking about, where like, so what you said is completely reasonable because you're thinking about a computer that's going to have to look through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily have an intuition for how fast the computer really is. And when people become programmers, once again, their intuition is slightly improved, but they haven't really found the limits.
Right.
So when I ask programming students that have been building websites, they might say something like 5 seconds, because maybe they've seen their own computer take 5 seconds with something
Okay.
that's
So
intensive.
it's by empirical evidence, by their own memory, by their own experience.
Yeah, but until you show someone that you really can fetch one message out of a billion disorganized messages,
Right.
but as long as you set up your database and optimize it correctly,
Mm.
once you see that it can take under a millisecond, you're sort of like thinking around all of this scaling
Right.
business changes, right? So like then I don't need to be adding lots and lots of servers and creating a big
Mm-hmm.
ass distributed system. I just need to learn how to use the database properly.
Right. This
So
concept. No, go ahead. Sorry, finish.
yeah, no, I can be done.
All right.
Come on.
This concept comes around actually quite often when certain things get developed. People usually go on just adding more and more, and then we have a return to the fundamentals, and then people rediscover how if you learn the fundamentals correctly, you can optimize systems in such a way. Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just think about what kind of video games we were able to play in like complex 3D worlds that are like online. Like think about World of Warcraft. I don't even know
Yeah.
what year it came out in, but like it's been so long.
Right.
And yeah, and then think about like having a website that is like loading slowly. Like it
Mm.
doesn't make sense, right? Like what one is so much more complicated. And we
Right.
were able to do those properly early on. So I mean, I don't expect everyone to become like an excellent engineer at everything. It's just that like I've seen a lot of startups take the difficult route
Yeah.
and building what they're building. And so my general suggestion is to like go back to the fundamentals a little bit and just like really
Right.
sort of push this idea of how long should things really take and
Right.
build the right intuition around it because that will guide your decision making.
Fundamentally understanding the problem and all the limits and all of the subject matter related in a way so you can find the real optimal solution.
Yeah, I mean, like one other example is so when we were building ceo.ca, um, our current way we monetize the site is we're a reseller of real-time stock market data, meaning we have these big connections that are streaming all of the stock market activity directly to us, like
Right.
all the bids and asks being placed, orders being placed, and the trades that are being executed. And there's like millions and millions of these. This is a really high volume of information. And we have to process all of this perfectly in order, without error, to be able to show the users the correct stock price and the charts and whatever. And yeah, and when we say the entire Canadian stock market, it's a lot of volume. Like, it's not just people trading. There's also like the the bots that do all the trading.
Right.
What do you call them? There was a term for it, high frequency trading. So given such a situation, one might think that this is going to be a huge engineering undertaking with a complex system. But if you sort of like learn the fundamentals of programming and how fast the computer really is, then we're able to process all of that information with just one server, and then another one as a backup, and we're done. So it's a lot more accessible, and this line of thinking, I think, opens up a lot of possibilities.
This is incredibly exciting. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just in terms of like working with small teams and working with cheap hardware. Yeah.
Coming a bit out more to a bigger scope of things, this idea of just how much power can be packed in little things. And I know some people in the like the tech industry, the AI industry, and then the thing is, what keeps this exciting is that no matter how hard they go at it, the amount of stuff the human brain can use with power, and then the data it stores, the processing power is incomparable to like the whole warehouses of data servers. And this is why it's so exciting going into this field, because the possibilities are still endless in a way, even though with all the things we know.
Totally.
We've gone for a while. Let's cut it here then.
Awesome. That was really fun.
Murat, thank you so much for coming on, for giving your generous time. Before you go, is there anything you want to shout out exactly?
Yeah, might as well make a shout out to philosopherai.com, because even the website is closed to public use. You can actually still get the iOS or Android app, which is $3 US or $4 Canadian if you want to try it. The reason it's only on the paid store is because I have to cover the OpenAI costs, which kicked in October 1st. But yeah, other than that, nothing else to shout out. Thank you so much for the chat, Linksy.
Thank you. It was so enlightening, so interesting, and we'll keep in touch, all right?
Sounds great.
A big thank you to everyone who reached the end. I appreciate every bit of support from you. You can follow us on Instagram and on YouTube at The Visionaires. You can email us at thevisionairspodcast@gmail.com if you want to tell us anything at all. If you enjoyed the episode, please tell your friends about us so we can have more exciting guests in the future. And if you have a certain person in mind that you want to have on the program, hit us up, all right? Goodbye.